Welcome. You are settling in for a journey, a long and gentle exploration into another time. Tonight, we will drift slowly into the world of Victorian Britain, a place both familiar and alien, a place we often imagine through sepia photographs and misty novels. Yet beneath the polished manners, the starched collars, and the bright lamps of progress, there existed a harsher, quieter reality. This was a century of contrast, a time when fortunes were made in grand townhouses, while countless others lived crowded together in dark alleys. A time of elegant drawing rooms filled with music, and of narrow slums filled with smoke, dampness, and disease. In this journey, you will walk both streets, the soot-darkened lanes of London's poorest districts, and the candlelit parlors of the wealthy elite. We will move unhurriedly, pausing to look, to listen, and to imagine the textures of that life. Our story tonight is divided into 4 parts. We will begin with the daily grind of a Victorian slum, where survival itself was a constant struggle. Then, we will follow the life of Charles Dickens, a boy who emerged from hardship to become one of the great storytellers of his age. From there, we will linger on the enduring mystery of Jack the Ripper, the Phantom of Whitechapel, whose legend has never fully faded. Finally, we will shift our gaze upward into the world of high society, where wealth and ritual shaped another, very different rhythm of life. And now, let us begin. Allow yourself to relax into the steady rhythm of the past. Imagine the cobblestones beneath your feet. Imagine the air, thick with smoke and dampness. You are entering the Victorian slum. Segment 1. Why it sucked to be in a Victorian slum. Imagine yourself waking in a room barely larger than a cupboard. The ceiling is low, the air is heavy, and a faint draft creeps in through broken glass, patched with paper. The room is shared not by one family, but perhaps by 2, sometimes 3. Parents, children, lodgers, all squeezed into the same narrow space, their breaths mingling in the stagnant air. This was the morning reality for millions of people in the Victorian city. The slum was a place where privacy was nearly non-existent. Thin walls let through every cough, every cry, every weary sigh. Floors groaned under the weight of too many feet, and water seeped through leaky roofs when the weather turned. Furniture, if present at all, was sparse and battered. A straw mattress might serve as a bed for several children at once. The rhythm of life in such a place was not guided by clocks or leisure, but by necessity. At dawn, or even before, you might be sent out into the streets. Children fetched water from a communal pump, if one still worked, or carried slopping pails of refuse to open drains. Many children, some no older than 5 or 6, went straight to work. They trudged toward factories, brickyards, or into service as errand runners. The younger ones picked bits of coal from heaps along the street, their fingers blackened, their pockets filled with whatever scraps could be found. The smells of the slum were unforgettable. Coal smoke clung to everything, drifting from chimneys, mingling with the sharper tang of human waste. Open gutters lined many of the narrow lanes, carrying away not only rainwater, but whatever households had emptied into them, dirty wash water, spoiled food, or worse. On warm days, the air grew almost thick with it, a haze that settled in the throat and lingered in clothing. Food, when it could be afforded, was plain and often meager. A crust of bread, sometimes dipped in weak tea. A boiled potato, shared between siblings. Meat was rare, often stretched with oats or soaked in broth. Some families survived largely on cheap fried fish or on street pies of questionable contents. Hunger was a constant companion, sometimes dulled by long hours of work, sometimes sharpened by the sight of shop windows filled with foods beyond reach. Disease found fertile ground in these neighborhoods. With no reliable sewage systems, with damp cellars and unventilated rooms, illness spread quickly. Cholera swept through entire streets, carried by contaminated water. Tuberculosis, and known as consumption, lingered in coughing fits and pale faces. Typhus and smallpox, too, left their marks. For many families, losing a child to sickness was heartbreakingly common, and though grief was real, it was so often repeated that sorrow became almost a rhythm of life itself. And yet, life in the slums was not without its small rhythms of community. Neighbors knew one another's names. Children played in the alleys, chasing one another through the smoke. Women gathered around communal pumps to exchange news while waiting their turn. Even in hardship, bonds were formed fragile, but real. Imagine the streets themselves. Narrow, uneven cobblestones, slick with rain. Gas lamps lit them in pools of yellow light, though in poorer districts, lamps were few and far between. At night, shadows stretched long, and the alleys seemed endless. Rag-and-bone men clattered by with carts, calling out for scraps of metal, rags, or bones to sell. The clatter of hooves on stone mixed with the distant whistle of factory steam. For a moment, picture yourself lying down to sleep in such a place. Your mattress is lumpy, perhaps little more than straw in a sack. The air is close, heavy with smoke and sweat. Outside, someone coughs, someone else shouts, a baby cries. And yet, exhaustion carries you into restless sleep, for tomorrow will come with the same rhythm. Work, hunger, cold, and survival. This was the reality of life in a Victorian slum. Far from the shining image of empire, it was a world of constant struggle, a world where every day was endured rather than enjoyed. And yet, from these streets, voices rose. Among them was a boy who would one day write stories that captured both the misery and the resilience of the poor. His name was Charles Dickens. And with that, we transition to our second chapter. Segment 2, The Life of Charles Dickens Imagine, now a child. A boy no older than 12, walking through the streets of London with shoes worn thin and pockets nearly empty. His father has been sent to debtor's prison, and the responsibility of earning a few coins falls upon him. He does not go to school. Instead, he works in a factory, pasting labels onto pots of blacking polish, his small hands moving with monotonous repetition. This boy was Charles Dickens. Long before he became one of the most celebrated writers in the English language, he knew the weight of poverty and the bitterness of humiliation. His life was shaped not in classrooms or gilded halls, but in the smoke-filled streets of early 19th century London. Charles was born in 1812, the second of 8 children. His father, John Dickens, worked as a clerk in the Navy Pay Office, a respectable but not well-paid position. His mother, Elizabeth, dreamed of running a school, though that dream was never fulfilled. The family lived beyond its means, often in rented houses that stretched their budget thin. When debts mounted too high, creditors pressed hard, and John Dickens was eventually confined in the Marshalsea prison. For young Charles, this was a turning point. While his siblings and mother joined his father in prison, Charles boarded in a humble lodging house and worked to support himself. He pasted labels by hand in Warren's blacking factory, day after day, the repetitive task leaving him with little but his own thoughts. Later, as an adult, he would rarely speak of these months, for the shame of child labor and abandonment weighed heavily on him. Yet this very experience planted the seeds of his empathy and of his fierce critique of society's injustices. When fortune shifted and an inheritance allowed John Dickens to leave prison, Charles was able to return to school. He studied diligently, and by his teens, he found employment as a clerk in a law office. This work gave him insight into the legal system, its slow grind and frequent corruption. At the same time, he taught himself shorthand and soon became a court reporter. His ability to capture voices and details would serve him well in his later career. By the early 1830s, Dickens began writing sketches of London life, short portraits of characters and scenes he observed. These pieces were published under the pen name Boz. They were humorous at times, sharp at others, but always filled with the texture of real experience. His gift for storytelling was undeniable. Then, in 1836, came his breakthrough, The Pickwick Papers. What began as a series of comic sketches grew into a sensation. Readers devoured each new installment, eagerly awaiting the next. For the first time, literature was arriving not in thick, expensive volumes, but in affordable monthly parts. Dickens was at the forefront of a new era in publishing. From there, his career unfolded with remarkable speed. Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, The Old Curiosity Shop, and A Christmas Carol followed. Each story carried not only memorable characters, but also social commentary. He gave faces and voices to the poor, the hungry, the orphaned, and the imprisoned. His villains were cruel landlords, heartless industrialists, and indifferent bureaucrats. His heroes were often children, clerks, or workers, struggling but resilient. Imagine Dickens writing late into the night, quill scratching across paper by lamplight. His desk piled with manuscripts, his mind returning again and again to the images of poverty he had once endured. His writing was not distant. It pulsed with lived experience. Even as fame grew, he never forgot the factories, the crowded rooms, the debtor's prison. Yet Dickens himself was a man of contrasts. Publicly, he campaigned for reform, visiting prisons, asylums, and schools to highlight injustice. Privately, his family life was more turbulent. He married Catherine Hogarth, and together they had 10 children, but the marriage became strained. His relentless pace of work, his fame, and his complicated personality created distance between them. Later, he separated from Catherine, a decision that cast shadows on his personal reputation. Despite these difficulties, Dickens remained tireless in his efforts. He toured, giving public readings of his works to vast audiences. His voice carried the weight of his words, moving listeners to tears or laughter. He used his platform to support charities, to advocate for the poor, and to demand that Victorian society confront its own contradictions. By the time of his death in 1870, Dickens had become a national figure. His funeral at Westminster Abbey was attended by thousands. Yet, perhaps most tellingly, it was not only the elite who mourned him. Ordinary people, the very poor whom he had championed in his writing, lined the streets in quiet grief. For them, Dickens had given dignity, had transformed their struggles into stories that could not be ignored. As you reflect on his life, imagine again that boy in the factory. His hands sticky with paste, his mind filled with daydreams, his heart heavy with loneliness. Out of those humble beginnings grew a voice that shook the conscience of an entire age. And now, as the sound of the city fades, we will slip from the world of Dickens into another shadowed chapter of Victorian London. The fog grows thicker, the gas lamps dimmer, and whispers stir in the narrow alleys of Whitechapel. A mystery waits there, one that has never fully been solved, the story of Jack the Ripper. Segment 3, The Mystery of Jack the Ripper. Imagine now the streets of London, but not the bustling avenues of commerce or the tidy terraces of middle-class respectability. Instead, we are walking through Whitechapel, in the East End, during the late 1880s. It is night. A chill lingers in the air, and a damp mist clings to the cobblestones. Gas lamps throw pale halos of light, but beyond their circles, shadows stretch long and uncertain. The narrow lanes are crowded, not with wealth, but with poverty. Here, lodging houses offer a shared bed for a few pennies, or a bare corner of floor for those who can pay even less. In this setting, an unknown figure emerged. He was never truly seen, never truly identified, but his name endures: Jack the Ripper. The crimes attributed to this figure took place in 1888, over a span of just a few months. They shocked not only the neighborhood, but the entire nation, and eventually the world. The newspapers of the time spread each detail, amplifying the fear and fascination. Headlines screamed of the Whitechapel horrors, and the image of a faceless killer stalking the fog became embedded in popular imagination. The victims were women who lived on the margins of society. They were often without steady shelter, relying on casual work, and vulnerable to the dangers of the night streets. Their lives were hard, shaped by poverty, by instability, and by the precariousness of survival. They are remembered not just for the way they died, but also for the lives they endured, largely unseen, in the alleys of Whitechapel. The crimes themselves were violent, but we will not dwell on the details. Instead, let us think about the impact. Fear spread rapidly through the East End. Women avoided walking alone after dark. Men eyed strangers suspiciously. Rumors circulated in pubs and markets. Who could the killer be? A butcher with his knives? A doctor with his knowledge of anatomy? Or simply an ordinary man, hidden in plain sight? Letters soon arrived at police stations and newspapers, written in a mocking hand. Some claimed to be from the killer himself. The most famous began with the chilling salutation, "Dear Boss." It was in one of these letters that the name Jack the Ripper first appeared. Whether the writer was truly the killer, or merely an imitator feeding the frenzy, remains unknown. But the name stuck. The police investigation was intense. Detectives walked the streets, questioned witnesses, and followed leads. Rewards were offered, descriptions circulated, and suspects arrested. Yet no one was ever charged. The killer seemed always to slip away into the fog, leaving behind only speculation and fear. Over time, theories multiplied. Some believed he was a foreign sailor who vanished after the crimes. Others pointed to local residents with troubled histories. Still others suggested a member of the professional classes, able to blend into society without suspicion. Even more elaborate theories have been proposed in the decades since, ranging from royal conspiracies to secret societies. Each one offers its own compelling narrative, yet none has been definitively proven. Archaeology and archival research in more recent years have shed light on the context of Whitechapel at the time. Maps of the district reveal the tangle of alleys, the crowded lodging houses, and the sheer density of people living within a few square blocks. Scholars have studied the lives of the women, uncovering the patterns of poverty that placed them in such vulnerable positions. In this way, the mystery of Jack the Ripper is not only about the killer, but also about the society in which he operated, a society where inequality, neglect, and desperation are part of everyday life. Imagine yourself once more standing in Whitechapel at night. The mist is cold on your skin. The lamps sputter faintly. Somewhere, a horse's hooves echo against stone. And behind it all, an uneasy silence hangs in the air. This was the world of fear in 1888, a world that has since been immortalized in countless books, plays, and films. Yet beneath the legend lies the reality, a mystery never solved, and a glimpse into the vulnerabilities of the Victorian city. As we leave behind the alleys of Whitechapel, let us turn to a different face of the same society. From the slums to the drawing rooms, from shadow to candlelight, we now move into the world of the wealthy elite. There, in brightly lit parlors and grand ballrooms, life followed another rhythm, entirely a rhythm of rituals, luxury, and display. Segment 4. The Opulence of Victorian High Society. We turn now from the damp lanes of Whitechapel to the broad, tree-lined avenues of London's West End. The air feels different here. Cleaner, lighter, carrying not the acrid tang of coal smoke and refuse, but the fragrance of polished wood, carriage horses, and well-kept gardens. The houses themselves stand as monuments to wealth. Tall townhouses with white stone facades and gleaming windows line the streets. Inside, thick carpets soften every footstep, while chandeliers scatter warm light across ceilings adorned with plasterwork. These were the homes of merchants grown rich, of landed aristocrats, and of professionals who prospered in the new industrial economy. Imagine stepping into the parlor of such a home. The walls are lined with shelves of leather-bound books or with gilt-framed paintings. A piano stands ready for an evening's entertainment. Guests arrive in fine carriages, their gloves spotless, their voices carrying the measured tones of refinement. For them, life is governed not by the struggle for survival, but by the rhythm of ritual and appearance. Meals were grand occasions. At dinner, the table might be laid with fine china, silver cutlery, and an array of dishes prepared by servants working below stairs. Roasts of meat, platters of vegetables, puddings, and elaborate desserts were presented in order, each course accompanied by the proper wine. Conversation, too, had its rules. Light, pleasant, never too serious. It was as much a performance as it was nourishment. In the evenings, the wealthy might attend the theater or an opera at Covent Garden. They would gather at masked balls, the women in gowns of silk and lace, the men in tailored coats. Each movement, each bow, each curtsy was part of a carefully observed social dance. For those at the top of society, reputation was everything, and appearances were maintained at all costs. Fashion marked status. Women wore corsets that shaped their waists into impossibly narrow silhouettes, layered with skirts and petticoats that swept the floor. Their hair was arranged in elaborate styles, often adorned with feathers or jewels. Men, by contrast, favored crisp suits, polished shoes, and high collars. To walk down the promenade in Hyde Park was not only leisure, it was a display, a way of being seen, of confirming one's place in the hierarchy. But beneath the glitter, pressures were real. To host, to dress, to behave according to expectation required effort, and the lives of the wealthy were as governed by rules as those of the poor. Young women, in particular, lived under the constant gaze of society, their futures dependent on advantageous marriages. Etiquette books spelled out every detail: how to enter a room, how to write a letter, even how to sit properly in a chair. Servants made this way of life possible. In the kitchens and corridors, far from the chandeliers and music, maids scrubbed, cooks toiled, and butlers managed the rhythm of the household. Their labor was invisible, designed to keep the machinery of luxury running smoothly, without disturbance. Thus, even within the same walls, contrasts of wealth and hardship were stark. Imagine now a ballroom at the height of the season. 100 candles flicker in crystal chandeliers. A string orchestra plays a measured waltz. The air is warm with perfume and the soft rustle of silk. Couples glide across polished floors, their steps precise, their faces serene. Outside, carriages wait, their lamps glowing in the darkness. For the wealthy, this was life in its rhythm ordered, glittering, and far removed from the smoke and struggle of the slum. This, too, was Victorian Britain. A world of contrasts, where two streets might divide hunger from abundance, despair from elegance. And yet, both belong to the same city, to the same century. Conclusion. And so we close our journey through the Victorian world. We have walked the crowded slums, where life was endured day by day in damp rooms and narrow streets. We have followed the path of Charles Dickens, who transformed hardship into stories that still resonate. We have wandered through the fog of Whitechapel, where mystery lingers unsolved. And we have stepped into the candlelit parlors of the wealthy, where ritual and luxury shaped another rhythm of existence. The Victorian age was an age of dualities: progress and poverty, reform and neglect, opulence and despair. To look at it closely is to see both the fragility and the resilience of human life. As you rest now, perhaps you carry with you a sense of how far the world has come, and how deeply the lives of ordinary people shaped the stories we still tell. The soot, the fog, the quiet endurance of the slum, the steady scratch of Dickens's pen, the whispers in Whitechapel, and the strains of music in the ballroom, all fade now into the background. You are safe in the present, far from the struggles of the past. Allow the rhythm of history to settle into quiet stillness. Allow your thoughts to drift, gently and steadily, until sleep takes hold. Good night.